When you hear that trumpet, you know it's the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network, and I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa, your host for the hour. We are talking again tonight about the whole issue of health care and the system that provides it in the United States, and some of the things that could be done perhaps to improve it. We've been talking about this now, with the exception of last week when we definitely had to notice the 9/11 anniversary, but we've been concerned about trying to get a free market version of health care for the United States, and this has been stimulated again by the fact that this issue is a major concern of many Americans, and it's being attacked and being discussed in detail by the left, and their solution is a single-payer system, Medicare for everybody, which frankly is a disastrous solution. But there isn't really any alternative that's being advocated by the Republicans or anybody else. So instead of cursing the darkness, I decided to try to light one candle, and we have been very pleased with the reception that we have gotten from many of the experts. I'm going to just start off with my opening statement tonight with a brief discussion of what that initial proposal was, and get some of the key points back in the discussion, and then we are going to be talking to our guest of the evening, who is an expert on the implementation side of great ideas. So the key points of the what a free market healthcare system might look like are, first of all, the goals. The goal would be to develop a patient-centered healthcare system where the patient is the buyer and also, therefore, the decision maker of his or her own healthcare decisions, including those of his family. And secondly, to do that, we need to reduce the cost of care to the patient by approximately, we would hope, up to 2/3 of the $4 trillion that we spend every year, that we spent last year on health care in the United States. There are some obstacles to this idea. First of all, there is a shortage of medical personnel, and we have suggested that the solution to that, which is, by the way, it's potentially catastrophic shortage of 100,000 doctors that will be missing in the very, very near future, according to the Mayo Clinic. The solution, we feel, is a part of it anyway, is a free tuition for any qualified student who is willing to serve in critical practices for 2 years after graduation, and we're following the military's ROTC program on that. We think it would be a major return on investment. Secondly, the second obstacle is the employers. Somehow, back in the day, the employers got roped into the idea that they were supposed to be supplying health care and insurance, and so we're saying let's get the employers out of the healthcare business and let the individual Americans try to work themselves collectively as well as individually, so that they can become the masters of their own fate. Secondly, the third obstacle is the federal government, which maintains, we feel that there are certain things that the federal government has to do, but not nearly as much as it does now. We feel it ought to maintain Medicare because of ethical and legal obligations. And we also feel that there are certain interventions that they can do that would be very helpful. For example, making health insurance a interstate commerce product, so that any company that wants to get involved in health insurance does not have to have 50 different bureaucracies to respond to the 50 different states. It's a real cost driver. And another issue that we feel very strongly about is that the federal government ought to set limits on settlements for medical mishaps, and we call that tort reform, which has led to defensive medicine, and that is a major cost driver. State governments are another obstacle, but we're also saying that they should be limited. First of all, to licensing practitioners of for medical personnel. Secondly, the management of a pool of indigent patients, of funding for indigent patients, which are now mostly taken care of by hospitals, and that increases the cost of hospitals, and they have to make up for all these charity cases that they end up supplying. There ought to be a mechanism by which people who cannot afford health insurance can, in fact, be taken care of, very similar to our uninsured driver type of situation. We also think that when you free up the medical insurance business from its constraints for each individual, by the employers and also by the states, that you now are inviting any kind of any kind of group who wishes to undertake the responsibility for their own medical care, whether it's the church or the credit union or the neighborhood or whoever. That ought to be open, and it ought to be available to the competition for the patient dollar. And then finally, there are some differences in how the average person deals with his or her health care, although not that many. The two most significant are, first of all, you will become the direct buyer of your own health care with the money that you saved from your enhanced paycheck, because the employer is not paying your premium anymore. He is putting that money into your paycheck, and you can, of course, put that into your health savings account. You will also be making the sometimes life and death decisions that are now made by budget-watching bureaucrats in the insurance companies and the government. Treatment ought to be at the discretion of the patient and the patient's family, with the professional assistance of the therapy in terms of the surgeon or the practitioner, and the government and the insurance companies ought to get out of the way. The idea that they are determining who's going to get what kind of therapy is just it's an abomination. So that is those are the key points in the current proposal, and we are now you're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network, and I might call your attention to the fact that we also have the podcasts of the the three previous shows on this subject on YouTube. If you get YouTube, you call up YouTube on the internet, and then you'll see a subject line, in the subject line put Dr. Larry welcomes, and that will bring up the 3 podcasts. I'd now like to welcome our guest for the evening, Dr. David Rehr, who is a very well-experienced and well-known expert in the field of getting things done in the political world. He's an author, a professor. He has practical experience as a lobbyist in a previous life. And David, welcome to the Dr. Larry Show.
Well, thank you, Dr. Larry. It's great to be with you.
Well, I'd like to start with maybe you could tell our audience a little bit about your background and how they could get in touch with you and your writings and so on.
Right. So my name is Dr. David Rehr. I'm originally from the Chicago suburbs in Illinois. I now live in Arlington, Virginia, and work at the Schar School of Policy and Government at George Mason University. To contact me, people can send me emails at drehr, R-E-H-R, at gmu.edu. And I teach lobbying and leadership at George Mason, and I'm very excited about the ability of people to connect with their government, our First Amendment right to lobby, because otherwise elected politicians and leaders and bureaucrats would never know how far they could push the envelope because they need to hear from the people and see how their programs are working or not, how they could be improved or should go away, or maybe we're missing some things which the population can bring attention to Washington and the states and the local government as well.
So what do you think about the free market healthcare proposals that we're floating?
So I'll talk to them all, each of them in just a second, but I would suggest this. Number one, we all know things are not getting better. Number two, we're heading down a road where we have increased government intervention, higher costs, more hassle, more decisions being taken away from citizens. And for me, that's not the right approach to take. I'm like you, Dr. Larry. I think we need to empower people to make their own decisions and try to reduce the cost or burden of health care. But people are nervous about it because it's very important to people. And as the country demographically ages, I think people get more nervous about it. You know, you needed less health care when you were in your 20s, but you maybe need more health care when you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s. Secondly, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's a fact. That's a very, like Dr. Cragen was saying. He said we're all getting older and sicker.
Right. Unfortunately. Secondly, I think some things may be easier to get the attention of the government than others. Some are more controversial probably than others. So I'm a big believer in going for the lowest common denominator to try to fix that first. Because no one has a magic wand to fix everything, because people who oppose to your point of view and my point of view then could also have a wand and fix things which would be really bad.
Right.
So part of the problem we have with government, it moves slowly, which is good when it's moving slowly in the direction of economic freedom and progress, but it's bad when it's moving slowly in the direction of taking freedom away and enslavement of people. I mean, that's why we fought the revolution. That's why America is an exceptional nation.
Well, it all happened, what was it, on Christmas Eve in healthcare about, 6 or 7 years ago?
Right.
And
it was kind of rushed through. There was no bipartisan support.
It wasn't slow.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes you get people who are so into policy that they forget the reality of the world. And some of their reality, which they didn't consider, is when you go around to these state programs, their computer technology doesn't work, which only makes things worse. Or if it does work, it allows pirates to go in and steal their Social Security numbers, names, and addresses of people who live in these. That's not what we want. We just want to get good health care at a reasonable price.
Well, Dr. Cragen was talking about a study that he was familiar with, which showed that the average emergency physician in a single month was had to make 8,000 entries into the IT system that was supposed to be supporting patients. And he said that this has actually become such an issue that they're now finding it as one of the reasons why people are retiring early from the profession. They just can't stand it.
Right. So to one of your points on your plan, which I think is very exciting and maybe more easily doable, is giving kids the option to go to medical school, work like in the military for 2 years, and then become doctors and fill the roles of doctors and medical personnel. That is a great idea, and that also isn't necessarily perceived, and notice I use the word perceived, as partisan, because so much of
Right.
Washington now makes their decision even before you open your mouth. They look at you and go, are you Republican? Are you Democrat? Are you conservative? Are you liberal? Do you like Trump? Do you hate Trump? And even the way you're dressed, you're judged, and they decide their policy mix based upon that when it's not based on facts and logic and reason and a kind of a conversation, which is, of course, too bad.
And I think that if properly proposed, I could see that being a bipartisan kind of action, couldn't you?
Right. And maybe I could just take a couple minutes, I don't want to take too much time, but run through some potential scenarios. Like the first thing you have to do to be successful that I've found over the years is have a concept paper. You have
Right.
that. Probably needs to be fleshed out a little bit with some numbers, and maybe you can demonstrate beyond just 100,000 leaving. Maybe in some states, in New York, more are leaving than in Indiana. I don't know. And then secondly, you have to think about, okay, we need to get at least one person, member of Congress, to put it in the hopper, put it in the bill form,
Right.
so it gets introduced and it's taken seriously. There are about 7,800 bills introduced every Congress, so there's a lot of them. But once you get the bill in, then you can organize people who support you around that bill to get them to co-sponsor the bill. Let's say it gets a number, H.R. 1725.
But the key to being in the top tier of the 7,500 has a lot to do with who it is that's sponsoring it, isn't it? And introducing it. Who's behind it?
That's true, but I would say I'm an old-fashioned grit wins out person. So I think that you can get somebody who's a top-tier person to sponsor it, and it moves faster. But sometimes, for their own reasons, they're cautious. They want to know all the different viewpoints. They want to spend 10 months studying it. I don't want to do that. You get someone in the lower rung who just says, Larry, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And they run with it. And you get a lot of enthusiasm and momentum that way, which people appreciate.
I'm assuming you know some people like that.
Yeah, I do. I know a few people who are important, but also a lot of people, not that they're unimportant, but who get tired of waiting around when they have people and constituents who have real problems that need to be solved.
Yeah. Keep that thought.
Right. So secondly, after you get the bill introduced, then you need to figure out, how do we explain it? How do we frame the issue to people so they get it? And that's where this is a great idea, because you can simply say to folks, no medical people to serve constituents, and that gets everyone's attention. And I would argue probably this problem is exacerbated in rural areas in America.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you can go out and pick up a lot more rural members who understand having their constituents having to drive 50 miles to a doctor, or only seeing a doctor Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, or something which makes life more difficult for them. And it'll give you kind of a seed or a group of supporters then to build to the magic majority, which is 218 in the House and 51 in the Senate, although you need more in the Senate with filibuster. But then, so you get your bill introduced. You maybe target rural people for members, both women and men, to get on the bill. Then you ask all of your supporters, people listening to this radio show and other shows and reading op-eds and producing knowledge for people all across the country, to contact their representatives and build momentum. And I've done some kind of crazy ways to do that in my life. I was involved with a medical group that wanted to get more resources to help find a solution to the disease that primarily young children face. And they were getting stonewalled by one member of Congress. And I looked at him and I said, can you get 10 people from their district to call them every day and ask them why they're standing in between a solution for them and their children? And they're like, yeah. So after 15 days, 20 days of this, the member of Congress didn't want to get any more phone calls, didn't want the negative publicity, felt like it was hurting his reelection. So he was like, what do you want me to do? I'll do it. And you just have to then get people to put sufficient pressure on their elected officials to do the right thing.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And then going on, I'm sure that the next step would be kind of step 4, and I'll send this to you, and you can post it on your website if you want, is who would be your coalition partners? Who else might care about this issue when you talk to them about it? Of course, people from rural areas, but maybe the military community, which thinks very highly of the country and wants our people to be served very well, and also sees the advantage of filling our men and women in uniform, at least for 2 years while they're doing their work as becoming doctors. They might be interested in helping. And then you get the individual state medical organizations. I live in Virginia, the Virginia Medical Association, to contact their Virginia members of Congress to say, hey, we support this bill too. We'd like you to co-sponsor it.
Well, hold that thought. You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network. We're talking to Dr. David Rehr, and he's coming up with some of the practical ideas that we all need to listen to in order to convert these great ideas that we've been hearing about into some kind of reality. So keep on going, Dave. You're doing a good job.
Well, we were talking about kind of step number 4 would be coalition partners, people who would be interested. Maybe it's not their top issue, but it's an issue they care about. Invite them, recruit them to be involved. Then they also kind of augment your grassroots supporters to put authentic pressure on members of Congress to do the right thing. And then I'm a big proponent of leveraging the media. Like being on this show is great for me. I love to talk about how to lobby and how to influence government. But think about, there are 14,000 radio stations in America, really unlimited number. There's 2,000 or 3,000 TV stations. There's thousands of newspapers. Suddenly identify people who are willing to tell their story about challenges to their life or maybe healthcare challenges in a positive way, and how this series of bills or bill could help them do it. Or a mom who says, I'm a single mom, I can't afford to send my son or daughter to college, but they could take advantage of this opportunity and become a doctor, which is really part of the American dream for some people.
Sure.
And then get newspapers put in, so then when members of Congress, they have staff who clips all these newspapers and records all this radio and television, they start hearing their constituents talking about this, and it sends them the signal that this is an important issue.
Well, speaking of the coalition idea, we had a program with the foundation for it was the I'm trying to think of the name of the foundation. David. What's the big health? The big social. I'll think of it. But anyway, what we did was went out to various groups in the various areas of the city, of the country. But we started with talking to a lot of the sports, the NBA teams, and the idea was the connection between health and business.
Right.
And these guys. You know, speaking of the media, I mean, they're practically in the media almost all the time, and we had a tremendous reaction because of the because really of the sports endorsement of the whole concept. So that's another potential. You know, there talk about dependence upon the medical profession. When we talk about athletes, you certainly got a very direct and visible connection there.
Right. I didn't mention this at the beginning about myself, but I'm the former president and CEO of the National Association of Broadcasters, which represents all the TV and radio shows in the country. And one of the things, it was a great organization, but one of the things that I learned there is they taught me the power of the media. And a lot of times people say, you know, fake media, this, that, or whatever, they don't like it, or they only like one show or one network, but they don't like others. But it signaled to me how you can, at relatively little cost, really get your message out there. Another thing you could think about, which I used when I was at the NAB, is public service announcements. There is a requirement for all radio and TV stations to run public service announcements that benefit their constituents. So then how do you figure putting in an idea into a public service announcement, and maybe it's, do you know that we're going to lose 100,000 people in the medical field? Don't you think that we need to make it easier for people to become doctors and work in medicine? And they run it practically for free. And while I was at the NAB, we had a program where we had 218 members offering their own public service announcements on things that they care about: fighting diabetes, fighting tobacco, smoking, mothers of young children, pregnant. It was all sorts of different things. Now I did it for a different reason, but they spent and allowed radio stations and TV stations to spend literally hundreds of thousands of dollars with good, positive messages about things that help the community.
Yeah, that definitely is.
Yeah, that's something you can think about.
An issue, but it takes money to produce those shows.
Right, but not as much as people think. So, or maybe you find somebody out there who feels passionately about this, who maybe is, worried about the future direction of the country, the cost of the program. They're coming up to their 50s, 60s, 70s. They don't want to get denied health care, and they're saying, America's been successful to me. I want to give back a little bit and try to help out. I mean, I have this center for. It's called the Center for Business Civic Engagement, about ways business can be more positively impacting the government. Because I think people bring a lot of very good practices on being efficient and effective in their businesses. They can bring those same practices to government. And I just rely on, in part, on people who just say, you know what, I'm living a great life, I'm doing well, I'm living the American dream, I want to help make sure that my kids and my grandkids can live the American dream. And, it's pockets here and there, but it's all helpful.
Well, boy, that's the kind of thinking that we need to be doing. And but I also, in my experience, you've also got to get people together to. Somebody has to organize all this stuff.
That's right. I mean, you've got to have someone who's got their pedal constantly on the gas to move the bus of people along.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well.
And I was just reading. I don't want to discourage the listeners or discourage you in any way, but I was just reading some information put out by Physical Note, which is a software company in Washington, D.C., and they said that they just had done a survey, and there were 1,000 different campaigns going on to influence Congress when they had finished the report. And I thought, wow, that's a lot. But that is a lot. But there are a lot of good ideas. There are a few really good ideas that touch everyone, and this is where, you have a really good idea. It benefits everybody. It's not necessarily partisan. People aren't yelling at each other. It's something I think a lot of people could get behind.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the idea that that we also had, which is that let's get companies, let's get business out of the healthcare business.
Right.
That's a lot more controversial. But
It is because some businesses don't necessarily want to change what they've been doing. And 25 years ago, I'm an older man, 25 years ago I was a lobbyist for the National Federation of Independent Business, NFIB, represented small business people. And we fought this battle then because what would happen is big companies in particular would take their pool of employees out of the labor health market, and then it would disproportionately affect everybody else. But the reason they did it is because states were passing mandates. And then if you wanted to offer health insurance, you had to offer psychiatric insurance, you had to offer maternity leave. And I'm not against offering maternity leave, but they don't necessarily need to offer it to men.
Right.
They could offer it to women, but it was this idea of it was just adding and adding and adding on costs. So they thought if they had their own plans, they could cut costs and they could get out of these mandates. It now turns out that it really changes the business when you're making business decisions, not only because of serving customers or producing products, but how does this affect my health insurance costs?
Well, yeah, and even and the idea of trying to start a new business, especially in view of Obamacare, there's certain kinds of businesses that only have a few people in them
right.
anyway, but there are other types of businesses that are geared toward large numbers of employees, and the capital cost of starting a distribution system, for example, or some kind of a delivery program, call centers. I mean, it's just astronomical.
Yeah, it's substantial. Now, most Americans, and this is just the power of this idea of framing, which we talked about at the beginning of the show, most people are unaware that 95% or so of the jobs in America are created by companies of less than 50 people. And small business, now I'm a big small business enthusiast, but small business accounts for almost all of the economic wealth of America, but they just don't talk about it. They just are constantly doing it every day because they're dealing with people and products and services. And the media doesn't really cover them because it's maybe not as exciting as covering IBM's next move or Google's next software launch or whatever it is. So, but small business, particularly in suburban and rural areas, are the backbone of those economies. And personally, I think the government should do everything it can to lower the threshold to start businesses, because I respond to incentives. Most of your listeners respond to incentives. You make it harder, as you said, to open a small business or to start one, less people do it. You make it easier, more people do it.
But the fundamental concern that it really transcends even the organizational structure is that we're trying to get the decisions for the medical welfare of your family and my family in our hands, and not in the hands of the bureaucrats in government or insurance companies. And we're going to take a little break here and come back, and let's talk a little bit more about that as a fundamental issue. You're listening to the Dr. Larry Show on the Bachelor News Radio Network. We've changed the word pad to the word news now, for obvious reasons, it seems like. We are talking to Dr. Dave Rehr, and I was just raising the fundamental issue of this whole thing is to get the patient a patient-centered system in which the patient is fundamentally responsible and empowered to deal with his or her own situation, and that unfortunately is not I mean, that is kind of a controversial concept. But what do you think about that idea? How would you promote that? I think you're in favor of it, right?
Yeah. I think I'm a kind of a small government guy. The closer decisions should be made, the closer to home that they can be made. You know, national security is a national decision, but schools is a local decision. And I would think that health is a local decision with your local doctor and your family, because you're the ones who are responsible and in charge of it. The challenge we face there is that people, for some reason, a lot of people have health insurance and seem very satisfied with it. And then you get these stories of people who can't get it or don't get it. But in all these debates and all the things that we see or read about healthcare, it doesn't seem like anyone talks about that bond between the patient and the doctor. You know, I don't agree with her at all, but Senator Warren from Massachusetts, Democratic presidential candidate, has the most progressive plan, which basically gets rid of all health insurance, and we have a government-run system. You know, she says, well, who likes health insurance? And everybody laughs because no one likes it. So then how do we break through people's thinking is saying it's going to be better for you if we go local and we have patient-doctor relationships, rather than having some bureaucrat decide what kind of doctor you should see and when you should see him.
Well,
without being accused of being throwbacks to the 1950s. Well,
there are thousands, millions probably, of stories where somebody was inflicted with let's say cancer or some other equally deadly disease, and the available therapies were pricey, and eventually the decision as to which therapy was going to be implemented was in the hands not of the physician and not of the family, but of the insurance company or the government if it's Medicare, and that's a sin against nature, in my opinion. And if you want to get stories, I mean, Ed Cragen can give you story after story after story, and as I'm sure any other medical professional could.
Right. Well, maybe that's something more that we all have to talk about, because right now Congress hears the stories that it doesn't work, it can't work, it's too expensive, it's horrible, give me government-run health care. And they're activists, and they repeat their stories, and they flood the Congress with emails about their stories, and we need to make sure that they're hearing from people who don't have that experience but who have very positive experiences with that family-doctor relationship.
Well, there's another movement that's starting. In fact, a major events just happened here in the last week or so, and that is that Walmart has announced that they are going to a center of excellence approach to health care for their millions of employees, and that is that's sort of halfway. I mean, it gets the government out of it. The insurance companies are still in it, but they're very much in a reduced. They're very much in a competitive environment, and I don't know if you're aware of. I'm just learning about this myself, so
I don't know that much. I don't know that much about it yet. Sounds promising, but yeah.
Well, basically, what they do is they say, okay, we're going to have, they've always, typically they've had competition for the insurance coverage. Various carriers come in with their plans, and they decide which ones they're going to use. And but this is a case of treatment competition. So they will have various of the world's best clinics, for example, the Mayo Clinic or Rochester or whoever, and they will go out and actually solicit full care kinds of proposals from the best in the world, and the idea being that even though they're not necessarily right here right now, but in serious catastrophic type illnesses or accidents, it's very easy to get people from Arlington, Virginia to Austin, Texas in less than a day, and therefore you don't have to have just the local hospital.
Yeah.
And this has really put a major change in the cost and performance of the various therapies.
Yeah. Well, it's ironic how generally competition works when we use it, and it makes better outcomes when we use it. But there are always people who are fighting competition. Even now, whether people like President Trump or don't like President Trump, he announced maybe a month ago that we're going to push for more price transparency on what people get charged in medicine.
Oh, yeah.
And all these groups kind of threw up their hands and said, oh, no, we can't do that because we have all these secret deals. Yeah. Well, you know what? We'll see how secret and how good they are.
Yeah.
Because having the light on price is yet another way to reduce healthcare costs. And I commend him for it. And I'm sure I don't always agree with him on everything. I don't agree with my wife on everything.
Well, happy
she's usually
wife
right,
is a happy life.
Yeah, and she's usually right.
Well, but see, what he can't do, Walmart can do.
Yeah.
And they don't have to depend upon any kind of government authority to do it. They have the power of their own purse.
Right.
And this is I had on the show a couple of weeks ago the guys that wrote this book about healthcare is killing us, and one of these guys really know their stuff. They've got all these different the experiences of all these different types of innovations that are occurring in all the areas of healthcare. And one of the things they're talking about was these centers of excellence. And sure enough, about a week later, Walmart says we're gonna do that. So I mean that's very encouraging.
Yeah, and positive news.
Yeah,
when we hear a lot of negative
right.
news about health insurance. Yeah.
And it gives us a little bit of traction, I think, for some other reforms. Well, you were moving.
I was going to say
you were moving down the list there. Why don't you continue?
So one of the hardest ones. Why don't I pick one of the hardest ones? One of the hardest ones is going to be product liability reform.
Yeah,
that is putting a limit on liability, because that's where the trial lawyers of the country make their money.
That's why they're all Democrats.
Yeah, and I remember a friend of mine who had worked at the Trial Lawyers Association was showing me a picture how historically they have their meetings and they all take pictures of their yachts to see who has the biggest yacht. And I'm like, we want people to be successful in America, but it seems a little gluttonous to take pictures of your yachts and show them off. But this is the mentality is we'll protect people as we define it, but we'll make a lot of money at it. So, you're right. We do need to figure out how we resolve that issue, because I think a lot of medical people don't intend to cause harm. When they do, we need to right the people who have been caused the harm, but I'm not sure that's $40 million or $200 million or $500 million. But on the other hand, it hasn't happened to me. And if it happened to me and my family, I'd want to be sure that I have some recourse. So, but that's hard because it gets very emotional.
Yeah, but it's also a major cost driver because
right.
Defensive medicine in any kind of, it used to be, it was just the highly controversial or experimental types of therapies that were involved, but now it's gotten to be even pretty standard stuff.
Yeah, very specialized practices paid higher premiums, but now everyone pays higher premiums.
And speaking of that, there's another cost driver that I haven't attacked in print yet, but and that is the medicine of the equipment. Well, you're listening to the Dr. Larry Show, and I'm sure it's fulfilling all of the superlatives that were in that commercial. And we heartily suggest and recommend that you listen to the Dr. Larry Show all the time. And if you get really lonely for us in the middle of the week, you can turn on our podcasts, and we have them on the Blog Talk Radio and also on YouTube, and you would be just amazed at how much better you feel when you listen to the Dr. Larry Show. And that Tom is my Tom Donaldson is the one that is telling me that I got to start promoting this thing. So I hope Tom is happy with my little promotion. Anyway, that was tongue in cheek. So we were talking about the whole issue of
legal liability.
Legal liability, and I was talking about another cost driver is when you start talking particularly extensive testing, you get into the high cost of medical technology, and I worked with control data for a long time, and I saw exactly how that pricing works. In many cases, the cost of a technology product is up to and including the first viable copy of the product. I mean, it's all the research and all the testing and all of the debugging and all of that. That's the real cost, because then when you go to reproduce the next 1,000 copies, the cost per copy, especially if it's software, can be pennies.
Right.
And then so why do you have such a high cost for technology? You have it because the company that did it has invested a lot in the preparation of the product for the market, and now they have to recover that.
Right.
But if you wanted to get out from under that, it seems to me that if we allowed the R&D for medical technology, it would have to be clearly defined. But if medical technology R&D could be considered tax deductible instead of just simply a tax expense, I think that you could reduce that cost significantly.
Right. That might be another. I mean, I think what you're speaking to are thinking of all sorts of different options to skin the cat, so to speak. And we just can't look at what have we done over the last 10 years, because we need to think about what are we going to do that works when we know what doesn't work. So I'm like probably one of your many listeners who say, let's talk about, let's try it, let's get some ideas out there, let's let different states do different things. As long as we're protecting the safety of patients, which we are, we should let people have different ideas.
Well, and getting the one of the issues I think that's kind of underlies some of the resistance is the idea that it's hard for most people. Most people are not really very sophisticated buyers of medical services, and for them to try to become good, informed buyers and bargainers for various, for their own medical service is kind of intimidating. But if you take the idea that we can do this as a group, and we get some of the doctors to be part of our group, and then we go out as a neighborhood or as a credit union or as a fraternity of some kind, and we start then taking bids for the things that we want. I think that the collegiality of that would, for one thing, may be very reassuring to people, so that we're not leaving the entire buying process to a small group within the company or within the union, and then at the same time we also get the responsibility back with the patient, who then has the ability to make his own decisions, and those for his wife and his children and his grandchildren and whoever.
Yeah. I think I could be wrong. I don't know much about the subject area on this particular point, but I thought President Trump, or maybe the Department of HHS, was trying to move forward on letting ways for associations, professional societies, kind of interest groups to offer their own plans. So their as you say, their members could be involved and engaged.
Yeah, and there are some people in the Trump administration that are just biologically going to be in favor of this kind of stuff. I think of our friend Ben Carson, and these ideas are really, we have to coalesce them into some workable formulas, as you pointed out.
Yeah, or have a package, but then have each part of the package able to be broken out.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have the whole thing passed. You can maybe get 3 of 5 or 4 of 6, and then work on those other 2 down the road.
You have a graduate program, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, we have a. I'm going to brag on our school for a second. We have one of the best policy and government schools in the United States. We're really known for combating cybersecurity and technology. I think we're ranked first in the Washington, D.C. area and 14th in the country. But our master's degree in public administration, which would include lobbying and some other areas, is ranked 15th in the world. So it's a pretty good program, and my part of the program is teaching influence in a positive way. Some of your listeners will go, "Oh my God, he's the green swamp." But we want to be sure that people communicate the right thoughts to their elected representatives, so they understand what's working and what's not working, what needs to be changed, what doesn't need to be changed. And that's what I teach my students.
Well, we don't have time to discuss it now, but I'm going to throw out the idea that maybe one of your graduate seminars ought to start talking about some of this stuff.
Yeah, healthcare. I know I've only been with the school for about a year. I know we have some specific areas of strength, and healthcare may be one of them where we talk about this, but I'm not sure. But that's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, let's talk more about that off the air.
Okay.
And one of the things I try to do every time is to give a guest a couple of the final couple of minutes to talk about his whatever is really of your major interest right now? Anything that you would like to tell the audience that's not necessarily on the topic we've been talking about tonight?
Yeah, actually, I feel very passionately about this. Part of the challenge we face at all levels of government is a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability. And I think, for example, we have the power of the Internet where every American should be able to see every expense every government spends. Because I live in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington started a long time ago saying, we need to put our own self-interest aside. We have to do what's good for the people. That somehow has gotten lost over 180 years, and I think we need to remind people that they're accountable to the taxpayers and representatives who sent them to office. And so one way we do that is allow us to see where all the money's spent, because ultimately, having been here for 25 years, it's always about the money.
Well, that certainly is a welcome thought, and I want to thank you for spending this time with us and for the enlightening ideas. And we will try to follow some of your leadership here as we go along. And thanks again for.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been great.
A really good hour. This is the Dr. Larry Show, and we're on the Bachelor News Radio Network. We're also on my website of drlarryonline.com, and also on YouTube with the subject line of Dr. Larry Welcomes. Good night, and God bless everybody.